The following audio discussion is episode 7 of Astound's podcast series, AI and the Future of Work. Host Dan Turchin, co-founder and chief product officer of Astound, welcomes Marc Talluto, CEO of Fruition Partners, to discuss the evolution of ITSM and Marc's development as a leader.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever in the world you are listening to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, co-founder of Astound, coming to you live from the podcast studio in Menlo Park, California. I'm really excited about today's conversation. This is one of my role models, my friends, who's agreed to join us for a special podcast today. This is Marc Talluto, founder, CEO of Fruition Partners, which was acquired by DXC Technology. Those of us who have lived in and around the world of IT service management know Fruition and probably know Marc pretty well. So really excited to have him join us as a guest today. Marc, welcome to the show. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Boy, you did a great job, Dan. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Marc Talluto, as you mentioned, CEO of Fruition Partners. Geez, I was doing that since 2003. Was when we first started that out. So it's been a long run. I guess a little bit about me, my background. I didn't just start Fruition out of nothing. I actually was an Accenture and Deloitte consultant. I was a computer science guy coming out into the world in the 90s and kind of did my tour of consulting. And then finally, just one day, I'd had enough consulting and decided it was time to do it on my own rather than working for somebody else. And that's really, and Fruition evolved many times over the years. How it ended is not how it started by any stretch. But anyways, I don't know how far you'd like me to go down that or if you'd like me to keep going.
So you and I met when I was at ServiceNow and you were kicking off Fruition, and there wasn't much of a VAR ecosystem in or around ServiceNow. What would you say in the early days was kind of the aha moment when it seemed like your crazy idea was going to work?
Oh man, I don't know if I ever actually thought that. I think I lived with a constant state of paranoia that everything would go under in 6 months. But I would say ServiceNow was about the fourth or fifth vendor that we tried to work with. I mean, in the ITSM space, which is where our specialty was, we had worked with Numara, tried BMC actually, Axios, Sherwell. We had just gone a bunch of different routes. And I think when it was early days, maybe we got our first project from ServiceNow in 2009. And then they just kept coming. They kept coming so much and they wouldn't stop coming. They kept, all these project after project after project. So at least at that point, I knew I wasn't going to close the doors on the business in 3 months, but maybe 8 months. But that's probably the first time I was ever very hopeful because we had tried to partner with a lot of other software vendors and had no success. So this was the first time it was really, we were having a really compounding success, which is great.
So the little engine that could, ServiceNow, turned out to be a good train to get on. What would you say were some of the differences even early on between ServiceNow and the other products that you were considering integrating with?
It was the very first time we saw ServiceNow. And we were actually doing a vendor selection process for a law firm in Cleveland. And ServiceNow was probably, they showed up at, the 11th hour and 30 minutes. Everybody else, the traditional players were all there, but they were, the heavy on-premise, long configuration, kind of the legacy products, the HPs, the BMCs. And then these guys just showed up. They showed how fast everything could be, how you could tweak it on the fly, how you could change fields for, just everything we've come to know and love. Or I should say, we now expect it as normal. But back then, it was revolutionary. So it was just so eye-opening, the difference between, these legacy software products and ServiceNow, that was really, we didn't want to. I know I mentioned we were trying to partner with other software vendors, but we never wanted to be a VAR or a system integrator. We always wanted to be consultants who were, opining at a strategic, organizational, behavioral level. And when we saw this product, I was like, I think we really need to become more of a system integrator than just a strategy firm. But that was kind of the first time when we saw the difference between the ServiceNow technology and everything else. I think, I think the other thing that was a benefit is we just happened to be meeting ServiceNow at the exact right time. These other vendors, very established partners, very established channels, and ServiceNow had none of that. So, what we gave to them was this kind of consulting, if you will, strategy and vision for how the product could be used and talk to the customers through their process and their organizational change. And then we just added on that layer of system integration, which they really didn't have that. You mentioned I don't know if it's immaturity or nascency of the VAR marketplace at the time. And they certainly didn't have any of the consulting elements around it, as far as I mentioned, strategy, vision, organizational change, which is something we'd been doing for years. So it was really a good combination for us.
So to those who are unfamiliar with our world of IT service management, it seems a little dull, a little boring. What would you say is the thing that kind of has galvanized a pretty interesting community around something that might seem boring from the outside?
Even from early days, I kind of looked at ITSM or ITIL or service, all similar terms around the same thing of, how everybody works together. I kind of look at it that way, where, I'd be in these large IT departments and you'd see one group didn't like working with the other group, and app dev was throwing changes and somebody else didn't know where their equipment was and someone else is calling for whatever. But I kind of saw, for me, what was interesting, I'm the youngest child, and I think I'm more fascinated by, organizational behavior and maybe process efficiency, and just something in that service management ecosystem that's more about how people work with each other that really intrigued me. And so that is probably why I've kind of stuck in this ecosystem. Is it's a little bit more than just answering phone calls and routing tickets. I kind of look at it as how people spend most of their time, at work, trying to basically get along with other people and get something done and make a living doing it.
At this point in the world of ServiceNow, let alone other ITSM vendors, there are safely call it hundreds of VARs, and many of them, look up to Fruition as kind of a shining example of what they could become. And I know you, I know how humble you are. But take us back on a little journey and talk us through what you think you and the kind of the early Fruition team did better than maybe most of ours who are trying to get their sea legs.
Yeah, boy, what do we do different? I feel like if we did something different, we didn't know it at the time. I would say in the very beginning, we had a really good camaraderie as a company. Like, we really actually enjoyed working with each other and hanging out with each other. I think our backgrounds were from, more of the, like I mentioned, the advisory and consulting side. The conversations with the customers, they were just different. And as we grew, we had to point out our differences, obviously from our competitors, especially when we're, trying to win business. And we would always say, you can get a person to show up and say, yes, what do you want? I'll build it. But I don't think most customers wanted that. And we would emphasize this. We would say, we have an opinion. We've seen this done hundreds of times. You may want something from us, but we're going to question you. We're going to become more, we emphasize the partners and Fruition Partners that, we really want the best outcome for you as a customer. And that doesn't mean we're going to build what you tell us to. So as long as we entered relationships with customers that kind of understood that, and some of them, they really just wanted someone to show up and sit at a computer and just do what they asked them to. And I think we realized, there's an early phase of a business where you'll do almost anything for money just to keep the doors open and keep people occupied. But we realized maybe within the first year that that's not the business we wanted to be in. And luckily there was other business coming, so we can turn down some work. But I think that was always, if I had to point to the two things, it was the culture of the company. And we were trying to be, my mantra for the company was no jerks, right? I had left and started Fruition because I just didn't like the last company I was at. I didn't like the culture. I didn't like the hierarchy. I didn't like the personalities. So I was actually not trying to create a company. Like I said, I just wanted to kind of create a place I can go to work, enjoy the people I work with. But I think that shines through to the customers, especially in a services-based business where you have to win. It's not just, you're not just installing a tool, especially when you're doing process redesign, when you're doing strategy work. You have to get buy-in from that customer that this is the right direction. And the customer is, 20 to 30 different people that are managing, who knows, potentially hundreds of other people. So you really have to be able to communicate why they're doing this, why it's better. Everybody knows change is difficult. So you're introducing change of a product, change of a process, change of, how people are being measured. So, our method of working and being very, personable and affable, but with a purpose, I think that was a big differentiator. And we proudly kind of took that position. So that really, it fostered not only the growth of our relationship with customers, but just being able to attract talent into the company, which was, very important. I mentioned my roots were with, Accenture and Deloitte, and, they were masters at taking people like myself, out of college and turning us into consultants who could fly around and actually have intelligent conversations. And it just meant if you could retain and attract talent, then it's a winning and compounding recipe for success. So those are probably the two biggest things. I mean, yes, timing is very important in the ServiceNow ecosystem, which helped foster our growth as well. But, we had hard times, even in the ecosystem, and we just kind of, needed our cultural foundation to carry us through that. And it did, and we did. And so, eventually leading to a successful exit. But that was probably, I think those are the biggest differentiators. You might get as much information out of our competitors to figure out why we were different from them.
You make it sound a lot easier than it is. Now, how big was Fruition at exit to DXC? And then maybe some thoughts on how the culture evolved and maybe how you as a leader evolved over the years.
Boy, well, that's about 5 questions in one right there. So I'll go from just kind of me as a leader into kind of the company when we sold, and then kind of maybe even what happened after that. For me as a leader, I never really, maybe being a leader is sometimes you don't see yourself as a leader. I kind of saw my role as helping other people, succeed, that we kind of have a mutually beneficial relationship. If I am the employer, I'm also trying to help them grow. I'm trying to help them grow in their career. So I kind of saw myself, almost as a coach. People say servant leader, but I kind of looked at like, if I can clear roadblocks for, my own company and the people that work there, give them a purpose to work there. I think that helped build me. I think defined my leadership. I don't know if I ever read books on leadership and I had to do ABC, but I certainly took that. That's just kind of my approach to working with people, is trying to make, kind of that we all succeed together. I will say that, over the years with Fruition, I chose to do things like communicate. I communicated we always did state of Fruitions. I always went through the numbers. My analogy was I didn't want it to be just like Christmas where the toys just showed up. And, people didn't know where they came from. They didn't know how long you stood in line for them. They didn't understand. They had to be wrapped overnight, blah, blah, blah. I wanted it to be like, hey, we're kind of all in this. And that when we have to make decisions and, some people need to be let go. Some people sometimes will open a new office. Sometimes we're, making decisions on who gets promoted. But I tried to be as transparent as possible. And I think I realized, as you say, the evolution of a leader, when you're managing 8 people, that's easy to do because you're all stare at each other all day. But when as you transition to a company the size of when we exited, we were 300 people operating in 4 countries, 3 continents. You really have to come back to, communication, nonstop communication. What's your purpose? What's your vision? Why are we doing this? And not just to be a cheerleader either. It's like, hey, we had some bad things happen. Let me explain to you why they happened. So I think people respected that level of transparency. But I think, for me, as a leader too, there were different waves of executive leaders, if you will, right? And people joke, that, if your first 0 to 10 million is whoever you can find that can show up and do something, and, why they believe me, I'm not sure. Then you get another group that goes from, maybe 10 to 30 million because they've done it before and they have the expertise and they can take you, to a little bit better way of operating. And then you have to, run with an entire another group of people, which can scale you from 30 to 100. And I had to just constantly be changing my style because the personalities changed as well with those executive leaders. Some who were like, hey, I'm here, I'm in it for the fun, let's do what we can, to, much larger egos that would show up and say, I've done it before, I'll tell you what to do. But at the base of it, it's kind of always the same. It's, well, we're all in the same sandbox. None of us are succeeding without the other. So I think I constantly kept trying to bring everyone back to a little bit of, hey, we're all people here working well together. I mentioned my mantra of, no jerks. And actually that's something I put on my, what we were using at the time, Yammer, instead of my picture, it was no jerks. But I also, I would say, take work seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. Like if we can have fun, we can admit our mistakes, then, I think we can succeed together. And that shined through probably in other things. I would say this too, it's not just what you do as a leader, it's what you accept and what you tolerate. And that's what I found probably some of my bigger growing moments was we had people who, while they could perform very well for the company from a revenue perspective, and they could, do great things with a customer, they also would create incredible problems internally, and have a lot of people that rubbed people the wrong way, and they just weren't team players. And I think what I had to realize, and I took coaching well from my team. I think that's maybe another sign of leadership is you're not just saying my way is the right way, but I'm taking a guess. Let's go with it, but give me feedback. And so some of the feedback I received was, Mark, you can lay out a plan, but if somebody else is out there undermining you or undermining other people or disrespecting people, and you tolerate that because they're generating revenue, then what you're really saying is that's okay. And I think that was for me. I had to kind of take that big gulp and go, okay, well, I might lose a customer or two. I might hurt some relationships these people have, but it's better for the company to not have them, as a part of the company. And so that was a big, all of these were leadership transitions, right? Not only dealing with your own staff, dealing with, your executive team, communicating well. I think when we finally exited, so, the multifaceted part of your question, we exited, we were about 300 people, like I mentioned. We had acquired a company in the UK, Partners in IT. We had acquired another company in Canada, Manta Group. And then we exited in September of 15. Life inside DXC, it was an entirely different way of leading a company because you just didn't have as much control. You were now part of we were part of I don't even know at the time, it was technically CSC. Later, HP and CSC merged to form DXC. But you went from managing a team of 300 people and making your own sales calls to now working within a 150,000 person company. And the customers are not direct customers. You're literally having to sell through and within your own company in order to get to those customers. And I think although we went on and did some amazing things inside of DXC, we did further acquisitions. We did probably 6 other global acquisitions. And it was great in the sense that Fruition as a brand remained for years, and that it was very humbling and very impressive that people who knew me, other partners in the ecosystem around the world, they were extremely happy to embrace, the Fruition brand, and they would convert and they'd rename, and, the name lives on in many different ways. And that was, I'm still in kind of shock that, whatever humble thing we started and the leaf and the brand that went out around the world. But it was very different. But I would say that it was different working inside of a massive organization like that. But I don't think the leadership style, it added new elements, but it was just more communication, more communication around the world. Trying to find the regional message was still there. My executive team, unfortunately, was disbanded. So now you had to work with other departments, within DXC that provided some of those functions. So it was all, anyways, I'm adrift at this point, but it was all, very different in every stage, or probably every year of the 10-year run that we had as far as being in the ServiceNow ecosystem. Every year I had to, learn something new and different, whether, because ServiceNow was growing, we were growing, our competition was growing, and then our, acquisitions changed. So it's just a constant state of change.
Well, I know Stone Lake and Matt Hawk and some of the early Fruition guys, and know that what you're saying, the no jerks, the culture. It's not just a mantra. That really is who Fruition was from the early days. Now, one of the other things that I recall as kind of putting Fruition on the map was the first Fru DevCon that you put on. Maybe talk our listeners through the history of that, and maybe just how you marketed Fruition, and what were some of the things that might have seemed crazy at the time that turned out to kind of build that enduring Fruition brand?
Yeah, sure. Boy, there's a couple things there too. So one is, Patrick, right? So Stone Lake, he just had a way of communicating with the brand and the language and the tone of our message. It was always professional, but not that serious. Like we could be lighthearted. Like even like I said, don't take yourself too seriously, but do good work. Well, that shined through in how we promoted the brand and how we promoted just the culture and how we attended conferences and different things we did like that. I think, and that showed up at every conference we went to, but the Fruit DevCon, what was unique about that was on the outside looking in, you would say, oh, there's Fruition. They've got a lot of people. We're probably the largest dedicated ServiceNow integrator at the time. And they're throwing a developers conference because we felt like if you went to any local user group, it was a commercial for buying more ServiceNow licenses. And then you had other case studies and people were, giving interesting examples. And if you went to knowledge, it was, you got some training, but, 60, 70, I should say 90% of it at the time was very introductory to ServiceNow. Now, this is, like I said, 6 years ago. And we just felt like we had learned so much that we could host this conference and pull it off in Chicago. So that from the outside, that's kind of what it looked like. From the inside, we were trying to scale the company and we were trying to grow so much. And we were trying to have all these people, new people to ServiceNow. Because what ended up happening, there's even a layer before this, which is we were hiring people that had ServiceNow skills. That doesn't mean necessarily that they were meant to be consultants. It doesn't mean they had application development backgrounds. It doesn't mean they knew how to do, different levels of integration. So in early scaling of Fruition, we said we just need somebody who could talk ServiceNow and put it from a customer. But that wasn't always successful. So we kind of pivoted to say, well, I think we need to bring in people with a certain set of skills, and then we have to teach them everything that our people know about ServiceNow. The problem was, nobody ever wrote anything down necessarily, right? There were Yammer threads and there were maybe a wiki here and there. And it was, as you can imagine, it was kind of scattershot as far as, what knowledge was where. And I kept saying, okay, we ran a boot camp. So we had some good developers that then we said, listen, for 2 days, I want you guys to come in and run a Fruition boot camp. Just teach everybody everything you know, whether it's integrations, it's Active Directory, it's security, it's blah, 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 you name it. And they did that, and it was great. And then we just kept scaling and kept growing, right? We brought in 20 people the first time, maybe 30 people the next time. I'm like, okay, now I think we need to write this stuff down, actually have some courses that other people could take, because we also were an ITIL training company. Because I definitely believed in education as a means of not only being good for your internal staff, as good as a market position, as a brand, being an education company. But all of these kind of came together, and I just said, why don't we just run our own conference? And it was, I think it was one of those things where you look at each other and go, can we do that? Like, is that something people would show up for? And I was like, well, you make a bunch of bets as a CEO on where to market and where to spend your money. And I was like, well, let's say we have a hotel and we put it out there. It's like throwing a party. If nobody comes, well, I guess you just keep the beer, right? It's like we wouldn't be out that much money if we threw this, conference. And I was like, on the worst side, we're out about as much as I would spend in 3 months of marketing. I'm like, but on the upside is we could have hundreds of people show up. They actually pay us to show up. And then we actually reach out to vendors who might actually want to, speak to those people. And so next thing you know, we ended up running the conference. We probably had a couple hundred people show up, which was tremendously successful in our minds. And we did that for 2 years. The evolution of that, though, I think now you've seen it as CreatorCon. And I'll never forget the executive briefing we were in. So we were in a briefing with Dave Schneider, and I believe it was either the week of or the week after Fruit DevCon. Oh, I want to give a shout out to Fred Luddy, showed up at the very first Fruit DevCon and was on stage speaking about kind of future.
I remember. Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. I was like, this is the best. But I remember in the next year, with Dave Schneider, he's like, you guys are running your own developers conference. And he's looking at his own executive team like, guys, why can't we get it done? And well, they did. So it became CreatorCon. And why compete with that? But no, and it was just fantastic. And it was a type of thing where, you kind of make a bet, you take a shot, and people show up. And once again, reinforcing the culture. Because not only did we not only do we give great training, but, then we have these after hours party. And I think I'm pretty sure we paid the trolleys to go drive us to a burrito place in the city. And we must have had 7 people at a burrito place at like midnight. But that's the type of thing. I'm like, well, that's the culture of the company, and we can do that because we're Fruition. So yeah, it all came together, and FruDevCon was amazing.
Beautiful. That's a good story. So what's some advice that you would give to a younger version of Marc Talluto?
It was also good. There's a lot of pain that I needed, I guess, in order to kind of mature the company. But I would say, I see a lot of entrepreneurs, younger folks. I actually work with my university. I think there's kind of a veil that needs to kind of come off your eyes. I think that when you're starting a business, you assume, like with FruDevCon, you assume conferences somehow are this very complicated thing, and only very specific people can do it, and you shouldn't do it. I would say it's like, so take the veil away, right? The curtain, right? The Wizard of Oz, right? It's just another person back there who's making some decision, whether it's the customer to buy and they need approval from somebody else to go buy it, whether it's the software vendor and what they really need is you and you need them, whether it's a conference and you just have to have a good brand and a good message. I guess the message, the message is there really are no barriers, right? They are what is perceived by you that you can or can't do something. And I think it took us a few years to figure that out. We kind of, acquiesced to the higher power. And I think for us, the pivotal moment was when we realized this is probably when was this? 2011, 2012? When, we were doing a lot of great work for ServiceNow, but a lot of that professional services was subcontracted. I mean, lots of it. And then they came in and said, well, we need to build up our own professional services team because we're going to go IPO. And I was living in the bubble that, the work was just going to keep coming. So I didn't need to have a sales team. I really didn't need to do, any of these other marketing things because the work was just there. And then that kind of hit me and said, well, I think we absolutely have to go do something, right? We had to tear down the veil. We had to go after it and make it our own. Whether it was a conference, whether it was we ran our own user groups, we just had to go do our own stuff. So yeah, the advice is you got to take some risks. There's the risks, there's a veil. And I think the only other thing I would add to this, I think you have to really know a market really well. Like you have to be capable, you have to be competent in order to kind of, especially in the professional services space, which is its own kind of unique beast. But I always felt like I had to be as much of an expert on what we were talking about and what we were doing in order to gain the confidence, not only the customers, but, our staff as well. So, the advice would be if you're going to get into something, you have to be passionate about it. Because I think if you're not passionate about it, people sense that. They sense that it's a job, or they sense that it's insincere, or they sense that it's just hollow. And you're never going to really have the same success as if you are following something you're very passionate about.
Good advice. So we got time for one last question. I really wanted to jam this one in. I know we're bumping up into our witching hour, but I love the founding story. That was great. How you got started. You kind of stumbled into success in some senses. When you look at where the market has been and think about where it's headed, there are a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this podcast. Maybe just with respect to the market that from Fruition. Any thoughts on what the next decade looks like, and what aspiring entrepreneurs might do to stumble into the kind of an opportunity that you found with Fruition?
Yeah, sure. So I guess, in the future, do you mean the future in the ServiceNow ecosystem or just kind of overall in like the ITSM landscape?
Yeah, ITSM as a discipline, kind of based on where you've seen it, how you've seen it evolve over the last 10 years. What do the next 10 years look like that might create kind of pockets of opportunity?
Sure. Yeah. And, it's interesting. You said pockets of opportunity. What I always, tell people is that even the story of ServiceNow, I guess is a way to look at it, is that there's always cracks in the establishment. And the establishment, it's like bark on a tree, right? As everything grows, there's new cracks and there's new ways of getting in. And so, at the time, for like ServiceNow, right, nobody was really doing cloud or, SaaS or ASP, right? It's all similar versions of the same thing. Everything was on-prem and it was legacy, and it took, months and months and months to implement. And then they found this crack because the market wanted something, just a little different. It's an adjacency. And that's kind of how I, even in building Fruition, I would always say, we're going to stick within this ecosystem, but as it grows, there's going to be new cracks, right? Those layers of bark, if you will. And so, we splintered off and tried to do managed services. We did through DevCon. We did, we modified some ITIL training. We did things internationally. So we're always, always looking for those cracks in how things are done today. There's some either inefficiency or something, that customers want different. So, one piece of advice, I'll say that it's both advice mixed with, where I see the future going is always talk to your customers, but you have to listen in a way that they're never going to tell you what the answer is. They're going to tell you what they wish they had, and they're going to tell you the problems they're seeing. It's up to you to then say, oh, well, what if we did this? And what if we did that a little bit different? I think that's where the spark of, finding light, between the cracks is, and that you can, kind of redefine things and say, well, this is where we're now here. We're operating in this space. So you have to be able to listen to your customers in order to get some of that market intelligence. Like, never stop talking to your customers, talking to your partners, literally talking to almost anybody. That's one thing I tried to do in and around the ServiceNow ecosystem is just get to know everybody, get to understand, kind of their feelings on where things are going, and that, help drive the business. I will say, as far as the next 10 years go, I look at ITSM, right? And it used to really be ITIL. And then ITIL was kind of a 4-letter word for a certain methodology. So people started to say IT service management. And then we started to say, well, what if we just take the IT out of it? And, this messaging is something that parallels, even ServiceNow is saying, the future of work. The concept of service management, for HR and service management for facilities, there's so many other departments that need this kind of coordinated work style. It's something that ITIL and ITSM brought to the IT department, but really the challenges remain the same for, if you're in HR, like I said, or facilities, or legal, or maybe call centers, they don't have a methodology that says, well, let's structure the way you work so that we can take the unplanned work and the planned work and how we do communication and how we affect change. And I think that's compounding because what's happened to the IT department is, radically shifting. How many customers do we see now where it's HR that went and bought Workday? Or it's, maybe the the accounting team went and bought, NetSuite or something else. The IT department used to be the guardian of hardware and software. And that to get anything done, you had to, kind of chisel through, their requirements for security and budget and blah, blah, blah. And as cloud and SaaS software, well, now all these, the demand for compute and data has not gone down, but IT no longer is the guardian of that. In some ways they are, but a lot of ways people can subscribe to these other solutions as a business unit. And IT has become in a way complicated, in a way much more simpler, where business units can acquire that technology and use it. And it is very consumer grade from a user experience, but enterprise grade as far as security and performance and capability. So I think the challenge is, especially for ITSM practitioners, is to kind of wander the hills of their own companies and see how these other business units are almost becoming their own IT. Shadow IT is a funny word because it's just evolved, right? That's something that was meant to say, well, it was bad, but now I believe it's just business units solving their own problems. But I believe I found that the disciplines IT and those familiar with IT service management, they can bring the discipline of project management, of data architecture, of integrations, of reporting and KPIs, things that we've come to know from IT as being kind of standard. Well, that's not how these other departments run. And we can bring that type of discipline and but we don't have to be the IT controllers. We can be the service management automators or efficiency creators. And I kind of think that's where the next evolution of not only work for people within ITSM to branch out into those other departments, but that's where the software has been for a few years now. But the trend is certainly that's where it's going. Undoubtedly, that is exactly where everything's headed. Is business units now have very specialized solutions tailored for them, but somebody needs to figure out how to put it all together.
I love the conversation, Marc. Feels like we're just getting started. I I love the metaphor about kind of finding the light shining through the cracks. And I hope that as that future of ESM, enterprise service management, comes to fruition, pun intended.
Love it.
Maybe you'll come back on the podcast and we'll discuss how things are shaping up. Would that be all right with you?
That'll be a pleasure. Happy to anytime.
All right. Well, Marc, this is great. We're going to wrap for now, but such a pleasure having you on, and look forward to continuing the conversation soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.